Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 198, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Monday, December 4th, 2023. Welcome to a new week. Glad to be back with you. Apologies if the audio isn't as good as it normally is. I'm having some problems with the board I normally use. When I'm at home, which I am now in Charleston, have been for the last week or so. I'm just having some problems with it, so I have to act as if I am traveling and have my mic directly connected to the computer, so I don't have the same setup I normally do. I can't hear myself, when I'm talking, and kind of can trust the levels and whatnot. If it sounds different, that is why. My apologies. Hopefully, I can figure out what's going on by Wednesday for that episode. So that's what's going on here. Outside of that, it's been nice to be back in Charleston. Weather's been back and forth, as you all know. Been some really chilly moments, and then also some not so bad, a little warm. We've had some overcast and some rain and such here and there, but after being in freezing cold Connecticut for a little while, I don't want to complain too much about the weather here. But again, we have had some chilly moments. Most of the week was spent doing work. I was able to see some friends. During the week, or excuse me, during the weekend. Nothing crazy, just hanging out, not going and doing anything funner. Don't get me wrong, I had fun, but nothing that would be entertaining to any of you. Just been laying kind of low, nothing too exciting going on as we are in, the full swing of the holidays here. And I'll be traveling again in just a few weeks. So just trying to get work done and close out the year on a high note. And that includes this little podcast right here. So without any further delay, let's jump into the news. Teachers in South Carolina could see a $1,500 increase in the state's base salary schedule, with the possibility of an additional $1,500 if the school districts add 5 more days to a teacher's school year. This is all under a plan proposed by the State Department of Education. The proposal is outlined in the State Department of Education's annual budget request. Superintendent Ellen Weaver proposed an increase of $1,500 to every cell of the state's minimum teacher's salary schedule. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you, all that means is that schedule pays teachers based off of experience and education level. You may have seen charts, based on how many years and what their level of education is, as far as, do they have a master's or not? Do they have a doctorate or not? Their pay increases every year, and with each change in their education background. So that's what they're referencing. So every single teacher, regardless of where they are in their teaching career, would get that initial bump, which is good news. $1,500 might not seem like a lot when you're thinking of the grand scheme of a full year. But hey, it's a pay bump. It's nothing to sneeze at, especially when many of us, teachers especially, but many people who live in the Charleston area will take that extra money if we can get it. It's not cheap to live here, especially in certain parts of the town. So definitely that's a good thing for sure. And that additional 1,500, would be a nice, that would obviously equal 3,000 total dollars more. But yes, it would add 5 more days to the teacher schedule. And if you're wondering, the current minimum salary for a teacher is $42,500. Now, that 5-day increase, if they do get that extra $1,500, would move the teachers' contracts from 190 days per school year to 195 days. That's according to the Palmetto State Teachers Association. Now, Weaver's pay proposal comes as the latest annual educator supply and demand report for South Carolina has showed that school districts in the state started with 1,613 teacher vacancies for the school year. That is up from 1,474 vacancies last year. So just shy of 200 more vacancies. And, this is me positing, this is me with no data, but just, anecdotally, things you hear, things that are going on in the state, that number shouldn't be surprising, that there's more teacher vacancies after, the last few years that we've gone through, whether it was the COVID year and the struggles that, Yes, students also went through, of course, and families, obviously, but teachers did as well. And many of them were caught in the crosshairs of culture wars about vaccines and should the kids be back in school. And they there was a period there where I can't speak for around the country, but what I would see online was some hate and vitriol from the community towards teachers, just blanket assumptions that they didn't want to go back to the classroom because they're lazy, or they're all liberals, and they're between that and the fight against teaching certain concepts in school, whether it's real or imagined, is also turned teachers and certain educators into villains in some people's eyes. And why would you want to work in that environment? And the pay, they constantly talk about how their pay isn't enough. And many of them have to supplement, their salary with a second or third job in some instances, whether it's working this, doing something during the school year, or taking up a job in the summer. So yeah, no surprise when you have conditions like that, whether it's you need to have a second or third job just to make ends meet, or to live a little bit more comfortably, and you're facing this hate and pushback from people in the community. Again, a lot of it's just culture war stuff that doesn't, for most teachers, doesn't even apply to them, even if there is truth to something somebody believes, or an incident actually happened at some school somewhere. It's usually like a teacher, like, but everyone's getting blamed by certain segments of the population, and it's tiring. Not to mention, certain school districts have seen the takeover by the Moms for Liberty group, whether it's candidates who fully support that group and the things they're trying to accomplish, or just kind of doing their bidding because they need the support to get votes. Again, another group that is making teachers and schools out to be villains, when again they're usually not. And so it should be no surprise that there's this many vacancies. Perhaps this bump in pay will help with that. It won't hurt, that's for sure. So I'm glad that the superintendent has realized they deserve some more pay. And yes, I know the extra 1,500 would require 5 more days of work, but those would be like professional development type days, which many teachers may be fine with. So I think that's all good. I'm glad she's recognizing that. It's just too bad she's not realizing some of the other factors that are causing teachers to leave the profession, and preventing people from wanting to work in these schools. It's not, when there's vacancies like that, it's not just because someone quit and that's the end of the story. It means that people aren't filling those vacancies. They're not getting either qualified candidates, because all the good ones don't want that job, or even if they have some interest, they're just not filling the roles for whatever reason. So it'd be good for her to come out and maybe acknowledge some of those things and work towards improving the perception that some people have about teachers in this state and around the country. But again, certainly increasing their pay is not something I'm going to, talk down about. I think it's a good thing anytime, someone can get a raise, especially folks like teachers. So that part is certainly good. And hopefully we'll see the tide change with some of this culture war stuff that's going on and these inaccurate theories and beliefs that people have about teachers in general. Next up, all but one of South Carolina's U.S. House members voted to keep New York Congressman George Santos in office. For those who somehow have missed the dramatics and just controversy surrounding Santos, he is a New York Republican, and he was expelled on Friday in a bipartisan vote. U.S. Representative Jim Clyburn, who is South Carolina's lone Democrat in the U.S. House, was the only member of the state's delegation to vote to remove Santos. Clyburn was one of 311 House members, which included 105 Republicans and 206 Democrats, who all voted to oust Santos. Santos is only the sixth member in history to be expelled from the House. Meanwhile, South Carolina's Republicans, which include U.S. Representatives Jeff Duncan, Russell Fry, Nancy Mace, Ralph Norman, William Timmons, and Joe Wilson, all voted against the expulsion. So, as far as the Senate, rather, Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham don't vote on this. This is, the House votes on it because it involves one of their members. So it's only our House delegation. And that delegation voted along party lines with, even though this was a bipartisan vote, they voted party lines as far as Clyburn was with, most Democrats. I think it was only 2 Democrats that voted to allow Santos to stay. But he voted with, the majority of the Democrats, whereas the Republican delegation here, voted not to expel George Santos, who is also a Republican. Now, there's been 2 previous efforts to oust Santos. Those were unsuccessful, but a recent House Ethics Committee report came out, and it said that he had broken federal laws by using campaign money on personal expenses, including trips to casinos, Botox, and on adult websites. So that report was enough for those 105 Republicans to say, yeah, this guy needs to go. Santos has been indicted on 23 federal charges, including fraud, identity theft, and providing false statements to the Federal Election Commission. So the argument that the Republicans and those 2 Democrats who voted against expelling Santos was that he hasn't been convicted of a crime, innocent until proven guilty. He deserves the presumption of innocence and shouldn't be punished for something he hasn't been convicted of. The opposite side, who voted to expel him, realize that this isn't the court of law. And yes, that's how our court system is supposed to work. That does not mean that's how Congress needs to act with its members. They are held to a high standard. And even if they haven't been officially convicted of something, any kind of ethics violations, or if there's enough smoke, there's usually fire type situations, they realize they don't have to let him stay in Congress. This isn't the court of law. And it looks bad for him. He may not be convicted. Who knows? But he needed to go. And, in addition, he's done a lot of dumb things, just lying about things that aren't important necessarily. He's lied about some things in his background. Of course, if people knew of some of those lies, perhaps they wouldn't have voted for him. So in that way, it surely is important. But he just has told some silly lies about his life, like how he was on a volleyball team in college and he wasn't, stuff like that. That certainly doesn't warrant being expelled. But these ethics violations and using campaign funds and things like that, I mean, it's a no-brainer. He needs to go. And with that, I agree that with what some people are saying, that Democrat Bob Menendez should also be expelled, and I agree completely with that. He's does not. Again, this isn't the court. He doesn't have to be convicted of something to be expelled from Congress. There's enough, again, with him, enough smoke that there's probably fire there, and things don't look so good. He should probably be expelled as well. We'll see if that ever comes up for a vote. I would be surprised if it doesn't, especially if there's an ethics committee report that comes out about him as well. And that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Pretty quiet last few days since the last podcast. Not a lot of big stories. I feel like it's been that way here for a bit now. And sometimes that's okay. We don't have any of these big, dramatic, or terrible stories going on to report on. Hopefully, as we wind down the year here, we can focus in on some of the fun stuff going on in town, restaurant openings, and all that. That's always a lot more fun to talk about. But of course, I'll always be bringing you whatever the most important news is going on around town. So, with that, thank you so much for listening. I want to thank Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio, and Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show as well. If you have a chance, please rate and review this podcast, subscribe to it so you don't miss any episodes. All of that stuff also helps get this show out to more people, which I would appreciate. And you can also help out by going to patreon.com/Holy City Center, where you can sign up for one of those support tiers. Until Wednesday, stay safe out there. Have a good start to your week. And of course, good night and good luck.